From around the 1950s, cars had become an everyday part of life for many people across the Western world. Mass production made them increasingly affordable, and the convenience to travel wherever and whenever you wanted saw them become the main form of transport for many. In 1895, there were just 14 cars on Britain's roads. Today there are over 33 million, and most of this can be attributed to mass production introduced by Henry Ford in 1913. Of course, Henry Ford's revolutionary moving assembly line, introduced in 1913, put Detroit in the USA firmly on the map as the global centre of mass car production. Michigan's biggest city quickly became known as Motor City, which boomed until around the 1980s when the car plants started closing, leading to the city declaring bankruptcy in 2013. Many of Detroit's abandoned car plants quickly became derelict and a target for vandals. Over 3,400 miles away from Detroit, in Heathhall near Dumfries, there's another car plant which is also abandoned, derelict, and the target of vandals. But when it was built by prominent Scottish car firm Arrol-Johnston in 1913, Heathhall became an important centre of car making in Scotland. This is the story of how this little piece of Detroit ended up being built right here in Scotland. If you are new to the channel, subscribe now and hit that bell icon to be notified of other great content from the Scotland channel. Anyone driving along the A701 Edinburgh Road through Heathhall, just a few miles north of Dumfries in southwest Scotland, can't help but notice a huge eyesore. But this is no ordinary eyesore. This is Britain's only pre-World War I American-style car plant, modelled on the Ford Motor Company's Highland Park factory in Detroit. And like the Highland Park factory in America, which was designed by Albert Kahn Associates in 1908 and opened in 1910, the Heathhall plant is also considered to be a building of national importance and is Category B listed. So, how did a slice of pre-World War I Americana get built in what was then countryside on the outskirts of the small county town of Dumfries? The answer is Thomas Charles Willis Pullinger, who was at the time manager of Arrol-Johnston Car Company, a Scottish car maker which produced the first automobile to be manufactured in Britain. That's not all. Arrol-Johnston also manufactured the world's first off-road vehicle for the Egyptian government, and a car capable of driving on snow and ice for Ernest Shackleton's Nimrod expedition to the South Pole. Pullinger visited Henry Ford's car factories in the USA and discovered a new cheap reinforced concrete system was being used to build car plants stateside. He returned to Scotland and set about planning the build of the Heathhall car plant using the same system the Americans were, so it was not surprising that an American firm was commissioned to build the Heathhall factory. This system represented a cutting-edge building technology, making Arrol-Johnston's car manufacturing plant at Heathhall state-of-the-art for the period. However, the company started its production of cars not in Heathhall, but in Camlachie in the east end of Glasgow in 1895. Engineer George Johnston developed an experimental vehicle which took to the roads in November that year, landing him in court for permitting a horseless vehicle that could travel to a top speed of 12 miles per hour onto the public highway. Even though Johnston argued the car was not a locomotive and therefore not covered by the terms of the Locomotive Amendment Act of 1878 under which he was prosecuted, he lost the case and was fined. But this setback did not prevent Johnston forming a joint venture with Sir William Arrol, Liberal MP for South Ayrshire, who established the Dalmarnock Iron Works, which was later renamed Sir William Arrol and Co., a large civil engineering firm, which not only built London's Tower Bridge and the replacement for the Tay Bridge, but also built the Forth Bridge in 1890. Arrol-Johnston was initially called the Mocar Syndicate Limited, and the firm produced a new car known as the Dog Cart, a wooden-bodied vehicle powered by a 10-horsepower 2-cylinder piston engine beneath the floor which was started by pulling a rope. But the company's Camlachi premises were destroyed by fire in 1901 and production was moved to a former thread mill in Paisley. In 1902, William Beardmore, owner of the Clydeside shipbuilding conglomerate by that name, took the largest shareholding in the company, creating a captive customer for his iron and steel components. In 1905, the company's name was changed to Arrol-Johnston, despite George Johnston leaving the company after a disagreement over changes being made to the firm by Beardmore. Under Thomas Pullinger's leadership, the car company saw production of vehicles increase significantly, but further growth was hampered by the limited space in the former thread mill, where the company was based. Pullinger's remedy for this was the construction of the new purpose-built factory on what was then a greenfield site just outside Dumfries. The location, it was felt, would enable the company to retain its Scottish identity, while bringing it considerably closer to England, its main market. Moving out of Glasgow into an area without a strong engineering tradition also helped Arrol-Johnston de-unionise its workforce. Thomas Pullinger's experience at the Humber factory in Coventry had left him deeply critical of the Amalgamated Society of Engineers, and he subsequently did his best to exclude its members from his workforce. The new works at Heathhall were built between 1912 and 1913 and provided Pullinger with an opportunity to follow some of the modern production techniques that he had observed on an earlier visit to Detroit. The factory opened in the same year that Ford's revolutionary assembly line started rolling, back in Detroit. The three-storey factory was built around a steel-reinforced concrete frame on an E-shaped plan, similar to those designed by Albert Kahn for Henry Ford and other US car manufacturers. It is the first known example of a ferro-concrete car factory to be built in Britain. There are a couple of other examples of ferro-concrete Kahn-designed buildings in Scotland, including the altered and empty former Galloway car factory in Tongland, built in 1917, and the G&J Weir Administration Building in Cathcart. Heathhall was laid out in accordance to American car manufacturing practice, with raw materials on the top floor through to finished cars exiting the building at ground level for shipment via the factory's own railway sidings linking to the main line. Finished cars were also shipped by road. The bodybuilding, upholstering and panel beating took place on the second floor, with vehicles being sent down to each respective floor by lift. The external walls of the factory were made almost entirely of glass, set in metal frames above low brick panels. The design provided much more interior light than usual, although the benefit of this extra light was negated in some parts of the building by a plethora of overhead belts and production machinery. Another indication of modernity was the increased attention paid to health and safety, and fire precautions in particular, especially relevant to Arrol-Johnston given their past experiences at their Camlachi factory. The Heathhall factory was also designed to provide a more employee-friendly environment, with artesian wells supplying drinking fountains located throughout the factory. There was a canteen and kitchen, a dining room, a health centre, library and games room, and there was even a tennis court on the factory roof. And so it was that Arrol-Johnston Car Company moved its entire production to Heathhall in 1913. But with the onset of war less than a year later, car production was quickly replaced by aircraft engine manufacture, and in 1916, at the request of the Ministry of Munitions, the factory was extended to enable whole aircraft to be assembled there. A year later, a second factory was built at Tongland, about 25 miles away from Heathhall. This was again initially used for aero-engine production, but later became the home of the Galloway car. When car production resumed at Heathhall at the end of the war, Arrol-Johnston was one of the first manufacturers to launch a new model, symbolically named Victory. In the meantime, Thomas Pullinger's daughter, Dorothy, a highly accomplished engineer and manager in her own right, persuaded her father to use the Tongland factory for the production of a smaller, simpler car, which became known as the Galloway, production of which was launched in October 1920. About 400 vehicles were made at the Tongland site before production was moved to Heathhall, which was operating at well below capacity. In March 1927, Arrol-Johnston acquired Aster Engineering of Wembley, Middlesex. The company was renamed Arrol-Aster, but despite offering 6 very different models from the small Galloway to a 70 horsepower Aster, the Great Depression of 1929 caused the collapse in demand for cars, which forced Arrol-Aster to go into administration that year. Before the Heathhall plant's closure in 1931, however, the company undertook one more prestigious project, winning the contract to rebody Captain Malcolm Campbell's Bluebird in preparation for his attempt on the world land speed record in South Africa in May 1929. Dogged with difficulties, including weather conditions, Campbell was unable to break the record of 231 miles per hour, set by Sir Henry Seagrave at Daytona a few weeks earlier, and the Arrol-Aster company was dissolved in 1931. However, the Heathhall plant continued to be used for various types of light engineering. In September 1936, it was acquired by High Powered Aeronautical Engines Limited, who planned to make Italian patented aircraft and marine engines, bringing with it plans to employ up to 2,000 people and to build an aerodrome close to the factory. However, the factory closed just over a year later because, despite the importance of the rearmament programme, the British government took the view it could not be associated with the project in view of the Italian invasion of Ethiopia, then known as Abyssinia. The factory, then one of the largest in Scotland, went onto the market in 1938, and in 1939 it was taken over by the Air Ministry and used as a store until 1946. It was then taken over in 1947 by the North British Rubber Company Limited, who used Heathhall to extend its range of products to include tyres, golf balls and the green Hunter Wellington boot. In 1986, the Heathhall factory passed into the hands of Uniroyal, then the Gates Rubber Company, and finally to Interfloor, makers of carpet underlay. The factory closed for the last time in 2013 and, despite its status as a listed building, has, like its counterparts in Detroit, since fallen into a serious state of dereliction, with most of its windows and interior attacked by vandals, in spite of the best efforts of Dumfries and Galloway Council to keep intruders and urban explorers out. The council has been wrestling with the issue of what to do with the factory, which is now on the historic building at risk register. The company which previously owned it has been dissolved, which means that the building is now considered ownerless. Under a somewhat unsatisfactory arrangement, ownership immediately falls to the English Crown rather than the local authority, which has to deal with it on a day-to-day basis. The Crown then offers the chance for the local authority to buy the building from the Crown, albeit at a price below the market value. But with council budgets stretched to the limits by cuts initiated in Westminster, if the council cannot afford to buy the site, it simply continues to deteriorate, and it is the council, not the Crown, now the new owner, that has to deal with the consequences of that. At the time of making this film, Dumfries and Galloway Council has been offered the chance to buy the factory from the Crown. At a meeting of the Economy and Infrastructure Committee in February 2025, it was agreed to progress with initial site surveys and submit an expression of interest to the King's and Lords Treasurer's Remembrancer as part of the ownerless property transfer scheme. But the council has not yet taken a decision on ownership, and with the building continuing to deteriorate, it's not clear whether ultimately it will be possible to save the factory despite its historic significance. A spokesperson for Dumfries and Galloway Council told the Scotland Channel that additional work is underway to identify long-term viable regeneration opportunities for the site in line with the local development plan. The building is currently Category B, listed by Historic Environment Scotland, which is in favour of its retention. But the fate of this historic building, however, looks bleak. In Detroit, a judge ordered the demolition of the historic Packard motor plant in 2022, 64 years after the last car rolled off the assembly line. The wrecking ball has all but erased it today. This is likely to be the fate of Heathhall's little piece of Detroit too, most likely to be replaced by a sprawling estate of bland, modern housing. But while it stands, it remains a reminder of Scotland's place in motor manufacturing. Other Scottish car makers of the period were Albion Motors, founded in 1899 and based in the Scotstoun area of Glasgow. Albion was acquired by Leyland Motors in 1951 and the Glasgow plant closed in 1980. Founded as the Hosier Engineering Company in Bridgeton, Glasgow in 1899 and later renamed Argyll Motors Limited, this became Scotland's biggest motor marque, moving to a purpose-built factory in Alexandria. The 12-acre site had its own railway line and opened in 1906 before going into liquidation in 1908. Among other marques, such as Haddington-based Dalgleish Gullane, incredibly Scotland also had two electric car makers, Edinburgh-based Madalvick Motor Carriage Company, which operated between 1898 and 1900, and Neil, another Edinburgh-based firm which was founded in 1887. Both firms were short-lived, being way ahead of their time. We hope you've enjoyed watching this little piece of Scottish car making history and its connections with Detroit, USA. Check out other great films available to stream now on the Scotland channel by visiting youtube.com/@the-Scotland-channel/videos. The Scotland channel exists to champion Scotland and celebrate the country's many achievements, its history, culture and people. Support the channel by liking and sharing our videos on social media and subscribing to our channel on YouTube. You can also become a friend of the Scotland channel and help influence the topics we cover and support our work. Full details can be found on our website at thescotlandchannel.tv/friends. Check out our other great content at youtube.com/@thescotlandchannel or at thescotlandchannel.tv/coming soon. Scotland Channel merch is also available to buy at thescotlandchannel.tv/shop.